"Get out of here! People like you do not belong in first class." The words cracked through the cabin like a whip. A blonde flight attendant leaned so close her shadow swallowed the seat, her hand raised as if the uniform itself gave her the right to strike. Beside her, a security officer in black bent low, ready to drag the woman from her seat. Cameras lifted, passengers stiffened, and in the center of it all sat a black woman in a gray hoodie, calm, silent, her boarding pass pressed between her fingers like evidence ignored. One moment of arrogance had turned a quiet flight into a stage, and the drama was only beginning. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to her. She did not flinch. The sting of the slap still echoed in the air, but her posture was anchored, steady against the storm around her. The flight attendant's voice rose again, sharp enough to slice through the engine's hum. "This ticket is fake. Someone like you cannot afford this seat." The words were not just dismissal. They were accusation, wrapped in years of practiced contempt. The woman in seat 2 amperes did not shout back. She simply placed the torn edge of her boarding pass on the tray table. Her eyes did not waver. She had lived this script before. Hotel lobbies, bank counters, boardrooms where her presence alone was treated like trespass. Each time the uniform or the title was different, but the tone, the doubt, the blade of prejudice, it never changed. Rows behind, a middle-aged passenger gasped. I saw her scan green. That ticket was valid. Another man lifted his phone, the red light glowing. The flight was no longer private. It was a courtroom in the sky. The security officer leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "You can leave quietly, or we will remove you by force when we land." He did not look at her boarding pass. He did not need to. His loyalty was to the badge on the attendant's chest, not the truth in her hands. And still, she stayed silent. Her calm was not surrender. It was patience, stretched thin, waiting for the moment when the balance would shift. Passengers whispered now, some outraged, some complicit in their silence. The cabin air was heavy, not with turbulence, but with judgment. The flight attendant smirked, enjoying the spectacle, and with one swift motion she snatched the boarding pass, ripped it in two, and tossed it to the floor. Gasps erupted. Phones tilted higher. "Go back to economy," she spat, "or back where you came from." The woman in seat 2 amperes leaned back slowly. Her silence had become sharper than any insult. Around her, eyes widened, cameras rolled, and a storm brewed 35,000 feet above the ground. The insult was loud, but the reckoning it had only just begun. The slap had landed, the boarding pass was torn, but the woman in seat 2 amperes sat still as stone. Her silence unsettled the very people who had tried to erase her. The flight attendant hovered above, face flushed with triumph, mistaking calm for surrender. Yet the quiet was not weakness. It was the stillness of a storm gathering weight. The security officer shifted closer, hand resting on the edge of the seat. His tone carried the authority of someone certain his decision would not be challenged. "Ma'am, you will leave this seat. If you refuse, you will be restrained when we land." His words spread like an order to the whole cabin. Passengers stiffened, unsure if they were watching protocol or persecution. From row 4, a woman in a navy sweater raised her voice. She showed her ticket. I saw it scan green. Her protest cracked the silence, drawing heads toward her. 2 rows back, a man lifted his phone higher, lens steady, already streaming. The cabin had become a stage, the witnesses unwilling to remain quiet. The flight attendant turned, her lips tight. "Stay out of this. That ticket was counterfeit. She is wasting everyone's time." Her words were aimed at the witnesses, but her eyes darted toward the phone. She knew the power of a recording. Still, she clung to authority as if volume could bury truth. The woman in seat 2 amperes leaned forward, picked up the torn pieces of her boarding pass, and placed them neatly on the tray table. Her movements were precise, deliberate, like filing evidence in plain sight. She did not raise her voice. She did not defend herself with frantic pleas. She only lifted her gaze, steady and cutting, and held it on the attendant long enough that the woman faltered, voice caught in her throat. Passengers whispered now, some angry, some frightened. "This is wrong. Why will they not check the system again?" A teenage boy whispered to his mother, "She is not doing anything." His mother pulled him close, eyes locked on the unfolding scene. The attendant snapped again, louder. "You do not belong here. These seats are for real clients." The phrase hit the air like a verdict. In that moment, every layer of bias, every practiced dismissal, dripped from her words. It was not about a ticket anymore. It was about erasure, about image, about deciding who deserved comfort 35,000 feet above the ground. The woman did not move, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The hoodie she wore, the sneakers at her feet, the quiet posture she chose, none of it matched the picture of privilege that the staff demanded. But she was not here to fit their picture. She was here to hold a mirror up to it. A man across the aisle shook his head. "I paid for my seat too. If they can throw her out, what stops them from doing it to anyone?" His words rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged looks. Fear and solidarity began to trade places. The security officer leaned in again, voice lower now. "Last warning." He reached toward her arm, but she turned her head slowly, her gaze heavy with a weight that words could not carry. The cabin went quiet, waiting for the next move. Every eye, every lens, every breath suspended in the pressurized air. The storm had not broken yet, but it was coming. And when it did, the balance of power in that cabin would change forever. The cabin lights hummed softly, but the atmosphere was anything but calm. Every passenger felt the charge, a tension pressing against their chests as if the air itself was judging them. The woman in the gray hoodie remained seated, unmoving. She did not plead. She did not argue. Her silence cut deeper than any raised voice could. The flight attendant, cheeks burning with the flush of power, leaned closer, eyes narrowing. She lifted her chin like a ruler addressing a subject. "Security will handle you. You are finished here." Her words carried a sharpness that rang against the overhead bins. She reached down, snatched the torn pieces of the boarding pass from the tray table, and tossed them onto the floor. They fluttered down like scraps of dignity, discarded without hesitation. Gasps spread across the rows. A woman clutched her pearls. A young man whispered, "She paid for that. I saw it." But the crew pressed forward as though disbelief itself was proof of guilt. The head flight attendant stepped into the aisle now. Tall, broad-shouldered, and armed with a voice trained to command, he looked over the passengers as if they were his jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this individual has presented a fraudulent ticket. She will be removed upon landing." His declaration turned the cabin into a courtroom, but one without defense. From the back, a passenger called out, "That is not true." We saw the scan. The voice was drowned by the sharp crack of the intercom as the head attendant continued. "We appreciate your cooperation during this security matter." His eyes flicked toward the gray hoodie with a smirk of finality, as if the verdict had already been sealed. The woman in seat 2 Amperes did not rise. She simply reached for her phone, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in silence. She tapped once, then lifted the device to her ear. Her voice, calm but edged with steel, broke the hush. "Activate emergency protocol. Inform the board. Document every word, every action." The flight attendant froze for half a second, then scoffed loudly. "Do you really think a phone call will save you? Who do you imagine is listening?" Her tone was mocking, dripping with disdain. Across the aisle, a young passenger angled his phone higher, live stream climbing with every second. Comments began to scroll across his screen. "This is discrimination. Why are they treating her like this?" "Stay strong." The cabin was no longer sealed off from the world. The world was watching in real time. The security officer shifted uneasily now, eyes flicking between the woman's steady gaze and the cameras raised around him. His training told him to control the scene, but something in her silence unsettled him, something that suggested he was not in control at all. The attendant who had struck her earlier crossed her arms. "Pathetic. Do you think your silence makes you powerful? You are nothing here." She leaned closer, her perfume thick in the charged air. "When this flight lands, you will be gone, and nobody will remember your name." But the woman did not blink. Her voice remained low, measured, unshaken. "That is where you are wrong. Every second is already remembered. Every insult is already recorded. And when the truth arrives, it will not just remove me, it will remove you." The cabin went still again. Even the hum of the engines seemed distant, drowned by the weight of her words. For the first time, the crew faltered. Their authority no longer seemed unshakable. The passengers leaned in, caught between outrage and revelation. The storm was building. The balance of power had not yet shifted, but the first cracks had appeared. And in that silence, Everyone in the cabin sensed it. The reckoning was not a question of if, but when. The hum of the engines filled the silence, but the cabin was anything but calm. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation. The woman in the gray hoodie remained steady in her seat. Her face showed no panic, no flinch. It was the kind of calm that unnerved people, the kind that exposed insecurity in those who believed they held power. The head flight attendant planted himself firmly in the aisle. His polished shoes gleamed under the cabin lights, as if the shine could hide the cracks in his authority. "You are a fraud," he declared. "This airline does not tolerate imposters. You will be escorted out when we land, and the authorities will be waiting." His voice carried with the weight of finality, but the edges trembled ever so slightly. Passengers shifted uneasily. A man in a leather jacket muttered, "This is too much. She has not done a thing." A woman 2 rows down shook her head. "They are humiliating her for nothing." The murmur of disapproval began to weave through the cabin like an undercurrent. The security officer stepped closer, his presence looming, his shadow spilling across her tray table. He placed one hand on the headrest, the other hovering near her arm. "Stand now, or I will remove you myself." His tone was flat, practiced, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. Still, the woman did not move. Her gaze rose slowly, locking onto him. It was not a glare of defiance, but a stare that carried history, memory, and power. It unsettled him in a way training manuals never prepared him for. His hand hesitated in the space between order and action. From the back of the cabin, a younger voice broke the tension. "I saw her ticket scan. It was green. She belongs here." A boy no older than 17 sat up straighter, his phone raised in trembling hands. The lens captured everything. His live stream count ticked upward in real time. The digital world was creeping into the cabin, multiplying the witnesses beyond those seated in rows of numbered leather. The blonde attendant who had delivered the slap earlier scoffed. "Children do not decide airline policy. Sit down before I call security on you too." Her words rang sharp, but the passengers around the boy leaned forward, protective, their expressions hardening. The cabin was no longer united under the authority of the crew. It was splitting, tilting, shifting. The woman in seat 2 amperes finally spoke again, her tone low but piercing. "You can shout as loudly as you want, but your volume will not cover your bias. You tore my ticket. You struck me in front of witnesses. Every insult you have spoken lives here now, in front of them, in front of the world. The only fraud is the one pretending this is justice." Her words hung in the air, heavier than the engines, heavier than the threat of restraint. The passengers exchanged looks, nods, whispers. For the first time, the balance seemed to tremble. The head flight attendant raised his voice once more, but the cracks were visible. "This passenger is dangerous. She is disturbing the peace." Yet the claim fell flat. The peace had already been broken, not by the woman in the gray hoodie, but by the slap, the torn ticket, the humiliation that everyone had witnessed. The cabin was no longer quiet. It was charged, alive with indignation, alive with judgment of its own. And in the middle of it all, the woman sat motionless, as if anchored to the very floor, waiting for the inevitable shift that was coming closer with every breath. The silence in the cabin was sharp enough to cut. Every passenger knew they were standing on the edge of something that would not be forgotten. The woman in the gray hoodie sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze steady. She was not pleading. She was not defending. She was waiting. The blonde attendant, the one who had struck her, leaned back slightly but tried to reclaim control with volume. "Do not be fooled," she said loudly, scanning the rows as if recruiting allies. "She is a scammer. People like her sneak in, pretending to have money, and try to steal comfort that is not theirs." The words dripped with contempt, designed to sting, designed to humiliate. But the words did not land the way she expected. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a baseball cap spoke clearly. "I have flown this airline for 20 years. I saw her boarding pass. It scanned clean. You are lying." His voice was not raised, but it carried truth, and truth has a weight that cannot be denied. Phones were rising now, almost a dozen of them, screens glowing like small fires in the dark cabin. A woman whispered to her neighbor, "This will go viral. They have no idea what they are doing." Another muttered, "They think uniforms protect them. Not today." The head flight attendant stepped forward again, voice commanding, though cracks were forming in the edges. "Everyone must remain seated. Recording is not allowed. This is a private matter of airline security. His attempt at control landed hollow. Passengers were not sitting back down. They were leaning in, watching more closely, recording more boldly. The security officer shifted, uncertain, his weight rolling back on his heels. His training told him to act, but his instincts told him the moment was turning against the crew. Every lens pointed at him carried the promise of accountability. His hand hovered, then dropped. The woman in the hoodie finally lifted her phone again. She spoke softly, but the clarity of her tone cut through the cabin. Every word you have spoken, every action you have taken is being logged. You struck me. You tore my ticket. You called me a fraud. The board will hear it all. She paused, her eyes steady, her calm unshaken. And they will not protect you. The blonde attendant scoffed, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the glowing screens. Board? What board? You are bluffing. Nobody important is listening to you. She tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle. A young woman seated near the window suddenly spoke, her voice trembling but strong. She is not bluffing. I know who she island. Heads turned sharply. The crew stiffened. The cabin filled with whispers. The power had shifted slightly, enough to rattle the attendants who thought their dominance was unquestionable. The woman in the hoodie leaned back, her silence returning, heavier than before. Around her, the passengers were no longer just witnesses. They were participants, allies, voices rising one by one. The storm that had been building was no longer distant. It was here, pressing against every word, every movement. And as the crew struggled to hold on to their crumbling authority, it became clear that the woman they had tried to erase was not the one on trial. They were. The aisle had become a battlefield. On one side stood the crew, uniforms crisp but confidence faltering. On the other sat the passengers, eyes wide, cameras raised, no longer silent. And in the very center was the woman in the gray hoodie, calm as stone, unshaken by the chaos unraveling around her. The head flight attendant straightened his tie, trying to anchor authority that was slipping fast. His voice carried down the cabin like a verdict. This woman is a con artist. She will be escorted out when we land. If you continue to interfere, you will face consequences too. The words struck the passengers like sparks on dry wood. Murmurs ignited. A woman clutching a toddler snapped back. She has not disturbed anyone. You did when you slapped her. The cabin erupted in gasps. The truth had been spoken out loud, no longer whispered, no longer denied. The blonde attendant, the one whose hand had landed that slap, turned red. That is a lie. I defended protocol. She was aggressive first. Her denial wavered. She knew every phone was capturing her words, and every face told her the passengers were not buying it. 2 rows back, a man in a business suit stood up halfway, ignoring the warning chime of the seatbelt sign. Aggressive? She has not moved. She has not raised her voice. We all saw who was aggressive. His voice was steady, undeniable, and it drew nods from the passengers around him. The security officer shifted uncomfortably. His orders had been clear: remove her, secure control. But his conscience cracked under the weight of the witnesses. He leaned toward the head attendant, whispering, "This does not look right. They are all watching." The head attendant hissed back, "Do your job. She is nothing but a thief in disguise." His words cut sharp, but they landed badly. More passengers heard than he intended. A young woman with a phone raised whispered to her live stream, "Did you hear that?" He called her a thief. Comments exploded across her screen. Racist. Disgusting. Unbelievable. The woman in the gray hoodie finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up the torn halves of her boarding pass from the floor and set them neatly on her tray. She lifted her chin, and her voice filled the cabin, low but piercing. "You accuse me of theft because of how I look, not because of what I carry. That is the truth every witness here can see." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the attendants faltered. Her words were not just defense, they were indictment. From the rear of the cabin, a teenager called out, "I am still recording. Millions will see this." Phones tilted higher. The threat of exposure tightened around the crew like a noose. The blonde attendant tried again, desperation creeping in. "Security will handle her. This is over." But the passengers were no longer compliant. A man near the front shook his head. "No, this is not over. Not until you stop humiliating her." Applause erupted, tentative at first, then swelling. echoing through the cabin. The woman in the gray hoodie did not smile. She did not gloat. She remained seated, anchored, silent. Yet in that silence, the balance of the cabin shifted. Authority no longer belonged to the crew. It belonged to truth, and truth had chosen its side. The applause died down, but the air remained charged, electric with indignation. The passengers had seen too much to return to silence. The crew, rattled and exposed, pressed harder, trying to claw back control with authority alone. The blonde attendant stepped forward again, her posture rigid, her voice sharp enough to pierce metal. Enough. This is a federal matter now. You are all being manipulated by a woman who forged her way into first class. She will be arrested when we land. She glanced toward the security officer as if her words were orders he could not ignore. The officer adjusted his belt, his hand hovering near the restraint straps. Yet his hesitation betrayed him. The weight of dozens of cameras trained on him made every move feel like a sentence he did not want to carry out. He muttered under his breath, "This is going to end badly for all of us." Ugh. The head flight attendant slammed a clipboard onto the beverage cart, the sound cracking like a gavel. "She has no proof. Nothing to back her lies. She is wasting your time." He leaned down toward the woman in the hoodie, sneering. "If you are really who you say you are, prove it. Show it to all of us right now." Gasps spread across the cabin. The demand was not procedure. It was a taunt, dripping with arrogance, spoken like a dare. Passengers shook their heads, disgust written across their faces. The woman in seat 2 amperes remained still. She did not flinch. She did not scramble to display wealth or credentials. Instead, she lifted her gaze, calm and deliberate. "I do not owe you a performance. The truth does not require my theatrics. It only requires patience." Her voice was low but resonant, echoing through the pressurized cabin like a drumbeat. Her words unsettled the crew more than a raised voice ever could. The blonde attendant spat back. "You think your calm makes you powerful? You are nobody here. Nobody." She reached toward the tray table, snatching for the phone that lay there. Gasps erupted as her hand slapped against the device, but before she could lift it, a man in the aisle seat leaned forward sharply. "Do not touch her." His tone was sharp, protective, and absolute. Other passengers stirred, shoulders squaring, ready to stand. The woman in the hoodie lifted her hand gently, palm outward, signaling calm. She spoke again, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You struck me once already, you tore my ticket, and now you reach for my property. Every witness here knows exactly what you are doing. The only thief in this cabin is the one stealing dignity." The silence that followed was brutal. Passengers shifted, murmuring. Phones tilted closer. The security officer stepped back half a pace, the doubt in his eyes now undeniable. From the back of the cabin, a middle-aged woman stood, her voice trembling but clear. "I have flown this airline for years. I have never seen treatment like this. She is right. The thief is not her." The head flight attendant snapped, "Sit down or you will be removed too." But his threat landed weak. No one Saturday. Instead, more passengers rose to their feet, forming an unspoken barrier. The woman in the gray hoodie sat in the center, perfectly still, her presence like a stone in a raging river. She did not need to shout. She did not need to fight. Her patience was cutting sharper than their threats. The storm in the cabin was no longer hidden. It had broken open, and everyone on board knew that nothing would ever return to silence again. The aisle stood frozen, a living tableau of confrontation. The attendants clung to their collapsing authority, the passengers leaned into solidarity, and in the middle sat the woman in the gray hoodie, unmoved, unbroken. She lifted her phone again, her fingers calm, precise. One tap, and a connection opened. Her voice carried with quiet command. "This is Carter. Activate protocol. Confirm recording. Notify the board immediately." On the other end, a voice responded clearly through the speaker. "Protocol active. All audio and video from this cabin are being logged in real time. The board has been notified." The confirmation echoed through the cabin like a verdict. Passengers gasped, whispering. Phones caught every syllable. The blonde attendant's face drained of color. "What board? What game are you playing?" Her voice cracked, stripped of certainty. She glanced at the head attendant, but his expression betrayed unease. He muttered, "End the call. Confiscate the device." Yet his own words faltered, landing with no weight. The security officer shifted again, his authority fraying. He looked at the glowing phones around him, then at the woman, then back at the crew. His silence said everything. He knew the ground was slipping. The woman in the gray hoodie did not rise. She did not raise her tone. She simply continued, her words sharp as glass. From the moment you struck me, from the second you tore my boarding pass, you ceased to represent this airline. You represent only your prejudice, and that prejudice is now evidence. Gasps rippled. A man 2 rows back whispered to his live stream, "She is documenting everything. This is bigger than we thought." His comments scrolled faster than his eyes could follow. The blonde attendant shook her head violently, desperation leaking through her mask. "This is nonsense. Nobody important cares about you." But the passengers were not convinced. Their eyes told a different story, their silence now aligned with the woman who refused to be erased. The woman in seat 2 amperes lowered her phone, her gaze sweeping across the cabin. Every witness felt the weight of it. Calm, certain, undeniable. "You thought my silence meant weakness. It meant patience, and patience has limits." The cabin was no longer a space of travel. It was a courtroom in the sky, and the verdict was beginning to shift. The cabin air felt electric, charged with anticipation. The woman in the gray hoodie finally rose from her seat, not with haste, not with anger, but with a deliberate calm that carried more force than any outburst. Her presence filled the aisle, her gaze sweeping across the passengers, then settling squarely on the trembling crew. Her voice was even controlled. "You demanded proof. You demanded that I explain myself. Very well. My name is Vanessa Carter. I am a shareholder of this airline. I own 30% of this company. Every insult you have hurled, every action you have taken, is being reviewed right now by the board you pretend to represent." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted through the cabin. Phones tilted higher. Passengers whispered, "She owns it. She is the board." They attacked their own boss. The blonde attendant's face blanched. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The head flight attendant stumbled back a step, the clipboard nearly slipping from his grasp. He looked around desperately, searching for support that no longer existed. The security officer lowered his hands, retreating half a step as the weight of her revelation sank in. He was no longer looking at a passenger to be restrained. He was staring at an executive whose power towered above his orders. Vanessa Carter's gaze did not waver. "You thought I did not belong here because of how I look. But the truth is simple. Without me, this flight would not exist. Without me, this airline would not fly." Her voice was not raised, yet every syllable struck like steel. Applause broke out in scattered bursts across the cabin, rising like waves. Some passengers clapped with relief, others with fury at what they had just witnessed. The live stream counts surged, comments flooding in by the thousands. The blonde attendant tried to recover, her voice cracking. You cannot just say that. Anyone can claim anything." But her words lacked conviction. The truth had already shifted the cabin's balance. Authority no longer rested in her uniform. It stood in front of her, cloaked in patience and power. Vanessa Carter did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply stood there, anchored, her presence undeniable. And in that moment, the entire flight understood. The reckoning had arrived, and the crew who believed they held control were now standing in judgment before the woman they had tried to erase. The cabin erupted into chaos, not with shouts of disorder, but with the swell of realization crashing over every witness. Passengers leaned into the aisles, voices rising, phones capturing every second. What had begun as humiliation was now unraveling into revelation. The crew, once commanding, stood cornered, their authority shredded by the truth standing before them. The blonde attendant's hands trembled as she clutched her service manual like a shield. "She is lying," she whispered, but the words had no power. They fell flat in the thick air, drowned by murmurs of disbelief from the passengers. A man near the front shook his head. "No, she is not lying. You saw her calm. You saw her patience. People who beg do not carry themselves like that." The head flight attendant's face had turned a pale gray. He adjusted his tie again, but his voice betrayed him when he tried to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm." But before he could finish, a passenger interrupted loudly. "Remain calm? After you slapped her? After you tore her ticket? We are calm. You are the problem." Applause followed, sharp and unforgiving. The security officer, once the enforcer, lowered his gaze. His hands hung by his sides. His silence was confession. He no longer had the will to carry out orders that had already crumbled under the weight of truth. Vanessa Carter remained still, her posture commanding without movement. She spoke again, not to the crew, but to the passengers who had witnessed everything. You saw them call me a fraud, you saw them strike me, you saw them try to erase me, and now you see who I truly am. Remember this moment, because silence allowed it to grow, but your voices, your witness, will end it. The applause swelled louder, joined now by whistles and shouts of agreement. The phones lifted higher, a sea of glowing lenses capturing justice in real time. The blonde attendant clutched the torn boarding pass still lying on the floor. Her eyes darted toward the emergency phone, but she froze, knowing it would not save her. Every movement, every word was evidence now. From the back of the cabin, a woman spoke firmly. You do not belong in that uniform anymore. Her statement cut deeper than any insult, and passengers echoed it with nods and murmurs. The head attendant tried one last desperate move. You cannot fire us, you cannot. This is just a flight. His voice cracked under its own weakness. Vanessa Carter's eyes settled on him, steady and unblinking. This is not just a flight. This is my airline. And your time representing it ended the moment you chose prejudice over professionalism. The cabin fell into stunned silence, broken only by the hum of engines and the rustle of passengers shifting to witness the collapse of those who thought themselves untouchable. The truth had been spoken, and the weight of it pressed down harder than gravity itself. The silence inside the cabin was suffocating. Every passenger stared, waiting for what would come next. The crew, once so certain of their power, now stood exposed, faces pale, uniforms suddenly fragile. Phones recorded everything, their lenses unblinking, their lights reflecting judgment. Vanessa Carter did not hesitate. She lifted her phone once more, her voice calm, but absolute. Boardroom, this is Carter. Effective immediately. Suspend the entire crew of Flight 712. Revoke their access. Log every action for legal review. A crisp voice answered through the speaker, audible to all. Confirmed. Processing suspension now. Within seconds, the head flight attendant's identification badge lit red and buzzed sharply. The blonde attendant's badge followed, its light blinking before shutting down entirely. The security officer's device gave a hollow beep, and his face drained of color. Gasps erupted from the rows. A child whispered to his mother, "She just fired them." A man muttered in disbelief, "In the middle of the sky." Applause broke out, louder than before, not scattered but unified, rolling through the cabin like thunder. The blonde attendant staggered backward, clutching at her badge as if shaking it could restore the power that had just been stripped away. "This is not possible. This cannot be real," she whispered, her voice breaking. But it was real, and the passengers were watching her unravel. The head flight attendant tried to salvage dignity, straightening his tie one last time. "You cannot do this here, you cannot—" His words died when another beep sounded, his system permanently locked out. He looked at his screen, then at Vanessa Carter, then at the passengers who now stared at him not with respect, but with condemnation. Vanessa Carter's voice carried across the cabin, steady and final. "You thought a uniform gave you the right to strip away dignity. You thought silence meant weakness. But today you learned the truth. Authority is not in a badge. It is in justice." The applause surged again, joined by cheers and shouts of agreement. Passengers leaned into the aisle, clapping, some standing to show solidarity. The live streams exploded with comments. This is history, power with patience, justice in real time. The suspended crew stood frozen, surrounded by witnesses, stripped of the very authority they had abused. Their silence now was not patience, it was defeat. The cabin belonged to her, the flight belonged to her, and the airline, as she had just reminded the world, belonged to her. The storm had passed, but the air in the cabin still trembled with its aftershocks. The passengers remained on edge, their eyes fixed on the woman in the gray hoodie, who now sat once more in seat 2 amperes. The applause slowly quieted, replaced by a hush of reverence, as if the entire flight understood they had just witnessed something far larger than a dispute in the sky. The crew stood powerless, badges red and useless, their authority gone. They were no longer officers of the airline. They were just people who had chosen cruelty and paid the price for it. The humiliation they had inflicted was now their own. Vanessa Carter folded her phone, placed it gently on the tray table, and rested her hands on her lap. Her gaze traveled across the cabin, pausing on the passengers who had spoken up, who had lifted their phones, who had refused to let silence reign. She nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of solidarity. Then she spoke, her voice calm but resonant, filling the pressurized air. You thought my silence was weakness. It was not. It was patience. And patience has an end. Today, it ended with justice. The words landed like a gavel. The passengers exhaled, some clapping again, others simply nodding, their faces alight with relief and pride. The live stream counters continued to climb, the comments scrolling endlessly. The woman in the gray hoodie leaned back in her seat, her posture steady, her presence unshakable. The reckoning was complete. She had not shouted. She had not begged. She had shown that true power does not require noise. It requires certainty. High above the clouds, at 35,000 feet, the message was clear. Dignity cannot be torn. Justice cannot be silenced. And prejudice, no matter how loud, will always collapse when truth finally speaks.